Heolstor the Nightlord is the central antagonist to Nightreign, a being of unfathomable power who has brought the night to the lands between. Heolstor's threat is perhaps the largest we've ever faced in Elden Ring, with the night threatening to erase the lands between and the Erdtree entirely. Heolstor himself is a complex character, a being who seems to have many influencing factors in his makeup, and to understand him, we need to do a deep dive into his surrounding lore. We have two main item descriptions associated with this character, one of these being his rune. That includes some fascinating details regarding a certain tribe. With that in mind, I want to start this video with a pretty large revelation, as I believe it to be central to Nightreign Story. What if I told you that the Cutting Gifted tribe, the group mentioned in the Nightlord's rune and the Cord End's item description, are more accurately translated from the original Japanese as the Tree Cloning Tribe? I feel this translation is critical in understanding the role that this group played in the main story, and it completely transformed my analysis of the lore. I believe that it explains many things, including the creation of the Tree Titan and why this tribe was punished. In this video, I will argue that this secretive tribe attempted to create a copy of the Erdtree to prevent the night, and in so doing they were witness to the sin of the Erdtree. In trying to understand the lore of this game, and the description of the Primordial Nightlord's rune, I turned to fellow content creator and translator Last Protagonist. He was kind enough to provide the following translation and analysis of the kanji used, and as you can see, the insight provided here is quite dramatic. And so I want to give a massive thank you to Last Protagonist at the onset of this video. This lore video will attempt to tackle several main topics. Firstly, the night itself, as we attempt to understand what this force is and what it represents. In doing so, we will also attempt to explain how Nightreign could fit into the timeline of the main game, as well as the temporal anomalies that plague Limveld. Next, we will look at Heolstor, his history and his relation to the infant, and perhaps the Nox. Finally, we will return to the Tree Cloning Tribe, and their role in this whole debacle, how the witnessing of the sin laid the foundations of this round table hold, and how they could be related to the Tree Titan and the Nightlord himself. The story of Nightreign is deeply complex. In some ways it is even less straightforward than Elden Ring, but I believe that by the end of this video, we will have a strong grasp on some of the game's main players and concepts. So join me this week as we venture into the night, and try to unpack the lore of Elden Ring Nightreign. Before we get started, remember that if you like Elden Ring lore, then consider subscribing to the channel, and checking out my Patreon for some extra content, giveaways, and other benefits. With that said, let us travel to Limveld and brave the night. Heolstor is perhaps the most powerful being we have ever faced in Elden Ring. His night is eroding the lands between out of existence, and that includes the Erdtree. To truly understand what kind of threat the Nightlord is, we need to examine what the night actually is, and what it represents. We learn some pertinent facts in the introductory cinematic that lines up with the story of the base game, and explains how Nightreign fits in relation to that original story. With the shattering of the Elden Ring, and the shattering war that followed, order itself broke down. This collapse drew forth an abomination known as the Nightlord. The night he brought with him is a cosmic level threat, breaking down reality and erasing history, separating the events of Nightreign from the regular timeline. For the Nightfarers, this is a conflict that has lasted generations, and yet for the inhabitants of the lands between, they will not have realised that it even happened at all, due to the collapse of time that the night brings. The threat of the Nightlord cannot be overstated. What we are witnessing in Nightreign is the collapse of reality. Even in the introductory cinematic, we are told that the curtain may be drawing to a close on this world, meaning that this could be the end of all things. The priestess is likely the Nightfarer who understands the threat the most, given her contact with the Formless Master, and she says the following of this threat.
The Nightlord is a living cataclysm. bent on laying waste to the very land that anchors us. Unless we bring its end, our world will be undone.
I also find that Adele's Night Relic paints a harrowing picture of the Night's influence, for it reads the following. The dragon was nothing less than a wonder of the natural world. Majestic in size and bearing, it was the apex predator of the old island upon which it roosted. But when the sky began to weep in hues of azure, all was lost. There was nothing left to feed upon, leaving only hunger, which grew into madness, a ravening unending. We get quite a powerful picture of how the night warps reality here, leading the sky to weep azure, and to render the Baron's original habitat bereft of anything, leaving it to feel only hunger. Adele's form itself, that of a gaping jaw, is a result of the night's destruction, a physical manifestation of the hunger and madness it caused the dragon. We also see that the night is responsible for the horrific events of the Revenant's past. Once the daughter of a noble family, she and her family were brutally murdered by her once loving father. This happened during a terrible storm in which the night reached her home and shattered her family in a night of madness and murder. The night will bring an end to everything. It is a threat without equal. The Nightlord is the physical embodiment of the cataclysm, a man driven by great tragedy to wish such a curse upon the world, and I believe that his past has had an influence on the form that the night now takes. We learn from his Night Relic that Heolstor was once a knight, a man who saw his country destroyed, something he failed to prevent despite his very best efforts. It reads the following. The country lay in ruin. The man who once was a knight had challenged the hero, but he too was no match. He fell, just another body in a great pile. But eventually he awoke, crawling out from underneath the others. Though he had failed to protect anything or anyone, he yet lived. And so he cursed the world. It was the dead of night, and from the sky poured down a great rain. We see here that on the night of great tragedy, the man who had become the Nightlord cursed the world. This moment was in the dead of night, and soon a great rain fell. I therefore think that the specific form the cataclysm takes is a reflection of Heolstor's own memory of that bleak night, as well as it giving power to his innermost desire, the eradication of a world that hurt him. As we will discuss shortly, the term primordial that is being used in relation to Heolstor not only represents the nature of night, but also is meant to represent the fact he is the first of the Nightlords, and so it would make sense that the form this calamity takes is moulded by him. We will return to the Nightlord and look at him in depth, but for now, this somewhat explains why the night takes the form of a dark rain, and when it originated. But now we need to understand what the night actually is, beyond it being a force that is unmaking reality. The game makes it clear to create a causal link between Order's collapse and the night's arrival. It is the Elden Ring's destruction, and the subsequent dissolution of Order during the shattering that drew the Nightlord to the lands between. As with many other external influences, it seems as though the Elden Ring's dominion keeps such forces at bay, but with Order's collapse, the Night is able to take advantage over a defenseless lands between. In seeing its effect upon the lands, we can gain an understanding of what the Rune of Night represents. It clearly is an entropic force, and I think that the night is representative of nothingness, the void, the absence of order and matter, as it breaks down both space and time in the lands between. A reflection of Heolstor's own desire to see this world unmade, for if there is nothing, then events like the destruction of his homeland would never happen. Upon reflection on real-world concepts, the greater will is the manifestation of order, how a universe should work in a sense once made. The frenzied flame represents the theory that the universe will once again collapse back into one great ball of heat and flame. And finally, the night represents heat death, where there is nothing but cold, endless void, as everything loses energy over time. And I'd like to give credit to my script editor Ash for making this connection between the night and real-world scientific concepts. The Abyss and the all-consuming night have different facets and characteristics, which are all well represented by the different Night Lords. The night is hungry, the night is cold, the night is mysterious, and the night is darkness. Indeed, I think the item description of the Night Shard encapsulates the nature of the night very well, fitting given it is night in crystalline form. It reads the following: a crystallized form of the power of night, a strange translucent thing with a corrosive shadow that appears to writhe. The reach of the night is limitless, its potential immeasurable, its touch indiscriminate, affecting any and all things. Whether one fears the night or welcomes it depends upon the manner of contact. Indeed, this item description does well in explaining the night's threat, but also the different way in which one might have a relationship with it. Such is the case with each of the Night Lords, those who have sought out the night for one reason or another, and have become part of it. In the base game, the night is closely associated with the people known as the Nox, making it more closely aligned with the elements in the world that oppose the Erdtree Order: darkness, silver, cold, and sorcery. This is unsurprising given light, gold, incantations, and heat are the elements usually found in the remit of the Erdtree, and are more associated with Order. Indeed, it is a common theme in FromSoftware that the dark, and variations thereupon, are more closely aligned with disorder, entropy, and darkness. The opposition that night holds to order is reinforced when we consider Heolstor's specific weakness, which is holy, the affinity type of Marika and order. Additionally, we see that the onset of night snuffs out the grace found in Round Table Hold, with its life only being prolonged thanks to the Executor's memories of the Erdtree. One need only look at the state of the world that we visit in Nightreign to see that the normal order of the world has been eroded by the influence of the night. We only need listen to the introductory cinematic to get a glimpse into the devastating effect it has had on the lands between.
Now heavy rains harry the region, threatening to wash away its very history. The Nightlord does not rest, as it ravages the lands between beyond recognition.
In a lot of ways, these ideas remind me of the exploration of time and space that one can find in Dark Souls, especially in Dark Souls 3, where we also see the effects of Order's dissolution as the fire finally fades at the end of time. As such, when we enter the Kiln of the First Flame, the epicenter of Order's collapse, we can see a massive churn or vortex, where all the lands from all the epochs of the world's history are pulled together, as relative time and space ceases to exist. Additionally, consider what one sees in the Nightlord boss arena, an endless desert, which once again reminds me of Dark Souls 3, and the final fight with Gale. In Dark Souls 3, this desert is meant to represent the end of time, the end of everything, when civilization and the world has been reduced to dust. It is also a direct antithesis of how, when fighting the Elden Beast, we see endless amounts of what seem to be Erdtrees, light and water. I believe that is what we are seeing in Nightreign. We are at the heart of the night, a place where reality has been fully broken down, and all that remains is dust. Hence, all that remains of the lands between is this twisted land known as Limveld, a blend of topography and enemies who are all out of their correct time and space. History has been eroded, time is in limbo, and various locations are blended together, all a result of Order's collapse. Indeed, we often see the lands between and Limveld being conflated, confirming that Limveld is all that remains of the lands between. For example, in Iron Eye's journal, we see he is being sent to track down a traitor, and that this quest will bring him to the lands between. And in travelling to the lands between, he arrives in Limveld, all that remains of the once great home of the Erdtree. In extreme cases, all sorts of locations get smashed together. For example, the mountaintops of the Giants and Mount Gelmir seem to have elements of their topography pushed into Limveld on certain nights, a real breakdown of the normal rules of order. Perhaps the most extreme example is that of Noklateo, a shrouded city of the Nox, massive in size that clearly has no business being here, and a lot of evidence points to it being the lost city of the Nox that once sat in the lower part of Leyndell. Scum Mage Infa actually has a great video on this subject, and it will be linked below if you are interested. The disruption brought by the Night Rune is also characterised by a breaking down of the barriers between worlds. In the game we face enemies from classic Dark Souls games, as if they have been snatched from their own worlds and brought into this one, a feat only possible via the Night Rune, though certainly exacerbated by the collapse of order. The collapse of time and order can also explain the presence of Margit, the Fell Omen, who will hunt us down, seeing us as nothing more than a pillager of the lands of gold. The influence of the night does things to one's memories, to our perception. Even the Nightfarers have their memories and identities eroded over time. I think the way the game plays with memory is a particularly fascinating way of exploring these ideas. As we play with the different characters, we see that their memories are fading, especially of events that took place prior to the calamity, and this would make sense as memory only operates as it does because of a clear sense of past and present. If time is jumbled and there is no proper flow in one direction, then of course memories would also become jumbled. However, because of the nature of time, it seems as though the Nightfarers are actually able to relive past events from their lives, in a physical and literal sense. For example, in the case of the Executor, he relives the moment he was sent to kill a painter, but couldn't. A fellow Crucible Knight was sent to do the job he couldn't, and so the Executor killed his fellow knight after the slaying of the painter. Unable to handle this series of events, the Executor commits seppuku. Prior to him reliving this memory, he did not have the scar, and yet after he returns from it, he has a scar on his stomach, a literal physical repercussion from this past event. Indeed, the priestess notes how his memory has altered him, as she says the following.
But what's this wound? Ah, from your memories.
The Fell Omen is confused, lost in the night, and not seeing the bigger picture, for if he knew our true mission, then surely he would support us. I think that Morgott is purposefully being fooled by the night, turned into Heolstor's agent to stop the Nightfarers. If you look closely at his model, you can see that there appears to be a miasma covering his eyes, as if the night is fully warping his perception. The night has made him believe he is defending the lands of gold, when in fact he is being tricked to help ensure their destruction. Additionally, we often face corrupted invader Nightfarers from other worlds. We learn from Iron Eye's remembrance that these invaders are essentially other versions of the characters from other worlds. Worlds where they knelt before the Nightlord and became his agent. These collections of observations could lead us to conclude the blessing of night is similar to that of grace, yet instead of instilling a quiet sense of loyalty and duty, the night controls completely. And credit to my script editor for making this parallel between the night and grace. This type of invasion is indeed possible in base game Elden Ring, usually via the tools of a powerful demigod, and so perhaps this phenomena in Nightreign also explains why this is possible in the main game. After all, in the main game, order is still shattered as well, and thus the barriers between worlds must be weak, allowing invaders to cross into other worlds, much as the condemned do in Nightreign. Such is the situation in Limveld, but what of the world outside? Is it too being broken down by the night? Well, my answer to that would be that I believe that the lands between is at the centre of the storm. After all, even the introduction tells us that Heolstor has been drawn to the lands between specifically. However, we do learn of the night affecting events beyond the lands between. We have already discussed some of them. Adele's habitat on an island being destroyed, Daphne's estate being overwhelmed by the night's arrival. However, we get evidence that in some places outside of the lands between, life is operating as normal. unlike in Limveld. Iron Eye's Fellowship still continue their operations. Recluse has been involved in several battles, and Wilder's clan continued to live in the Windwale Knoll, until the Night finally drove them to their end. I think this paints a picture of the Night having its epicenter at the Lands Between, potentially due to Heolstor's specific grievance with these lands, or because it was summoned there by the Nox, and from here it is spreading, consuming, bringing death and madness to new lands. The collapse of time in the Lands Between also makes us come to a horrifying realization. The Lands Between and the Erdtree have actually been long destroyed. We are able to fight back and repulse the Night because of this collapse in time as well. We are repulsing the Night at a time before it fully consumed everything. Yet simultaneously, because there is no ordered flow of time, the Nightlord has already been victorious. When time collapses, everything happens all at once, rather than in a sequence of events. It is much like the stagnation of time in Dark Souls, where characters, invaders, and cooperators from the future and past all have their timelines overlap simultaneously while in Lordran. Black Iron Tarkus is long dead, his corpse sitting in the painting room of Anor Londo, and yet he can still come and help us in our fight with the Iron Golem. In Nightreign, the past, present, and future are all happening at once. Understanding this allows one to understand why there are two roundtable holds, the one you launch operations from, where Grace is still present, and the decrepit one where Grace has been snuffed out. The latter one is the future one to me, the future where the Night has fully destroyed the Lands Between. Grace is gone, and look around you. This round table sits at the heart of the Nightlord Desert. Earlier we described this arena as a representation of the end of time. The end of time in which the world has been reduced to nothing but a desert. This moment is the Nightlord's victory, an endless stretch of nothing through which the Nightlord trudges, no longer caring about why he reduced the world to such a state. It is only by finally defeating the Nightlord and returning his rune to order that order is restored, as is the timeline to the moment at which the calamity first occurred. Additionally, a really interesting Reddit post makes a really bold claim that also fits in with this concept of time, that we have already defeated the Nightlord numerous times. This suggestion comes from a Reddit post by Dr. Pikachu PhD, in which they refer to Bonfire VN's video, A Closer Look at the Nightlord. In this he looks at the weapons which the aspect of Night wields, and that initially he isn't bearing them as a weapon, rather he has been wounded by them. They note the greatsword which can be found on his back and driven into his hand, in concert with a dagger which has also been used to pin its hand to his chest. These weapons aren't its arsenal, rather they have been used to restrain, and OP believes that the greatsword is the weapon of Wilder, and the dagger is that of Duchess, two important Nightfarers who may have played a role in restraining the Nightlord after a prior defeat. Additionally, Dr. Pikachu points to a final item which may have been used to bind it, the wraps found around his body. These wraps have the same markings that the vestige of Night has, likely meaning they have the same binding magic of the Recluse cast upon them. Indeed, another commenter on this post, Calibin, suggests that the dagger is not of the Duchess, but rather is an Ictaris, the dark magic daggers that the Recluse brought to bear against the Pinion folk. Either one could see these pieces of evidence that the Nightlord was defeated before, bound and sealed away. Again, because of the nature of time, multiple defeats could all happen simultaneously and out of order. A prominent interpretation that I have seen of Nightreign is that it is a what-if alternate timeline, i.e. an alternate reinterpretation of the story that is not canon to the main game, where the Nox succeeded in bringing about their Lord of Night. While I agree that the player is free to disregard the story as non-canon, I do not believe this is an alternate version of the story or of the Lands Between. I believe Nightreign pitches itself as a story that can happen in the main timeline. It is just that because of the temporal nature of the crisis, it happened and was resolved in a moment, despite it being a generational struggle for those involved.
I vow, as priestess, that the Erd Tree will live again. It shall be as you remember.
What this means to me is that when the Nightfarers defeat the Nightlord, time is reset, and everything is restored to as it was at the end of the Shattering, and thus the events of the main game could play out as normal. With Nightreign included, the timeline would proceed as normal until the Shattering War. Then order would collapse, and the Nightlord would prey upon the world, and time would be eroded. The lands between would cease to exist, and in this branching timeline, the Nightfarers would fight for a number of generations against the Nightlord, until he was finally defeated. Thus, for the inhabitants of the lands between, it might as well never happened at all. They may well not know that such an event took place. With time ceasing to flow, such complicated notions regarding the temporal are possible, with all endings to Nightreign potentially being canon. It happened, and yet it also didn't happen within the main timeline. The events of Nightreign can have taken place, and yet because it is undone at the Nightlord's defeat, the main story can play out without being disrupted by the events of Nightreign. After Nightreign was announced, the game director Ishizaki said the following: "We'd like fans to think of Nightreign as an Elden Ring spin-off, first and foremost. The story is completely separate and parallel to the world of Elden Rings. If you had to tie it in some way, we had the events of the Shattering in the original game. After the events of the Shattering, this is a completely separate branch of the Elden Ring story. I think this more or less ties up with what I've said. It isn't an alternate universe. Rather, it is a causal incident that allows all of its events to play out, outside of the main game story, and yet still interact with it. It is a brilliant move, as players are free to play the main game and completely ignore the story of Nightreign, and people are free to view it as non-canon and disregard it. However, for those who want to take it seriously and integrate it into the main story, Nightreign also allows for that, by making it take place in the world of Elden Ring, whilst not contradicting the flow of the main events. Of course, there is a physical element to this cosmic calamity. Heolstor, the Primordial Nightlord who carries the rune within his body. With him come 7 other powerful Nightlords, each drawn to the night for a different reason and likewise representing another facet of its nature. The subordinate Nightlords are an interesting subject in and of themselves, and understanding their nature is important to fully comprehending the night. As we noted earlier, the Night Shard item description makes it clear that one can embrace the night, or one will be a victim of it. Of those who embrace it, we of course have the contaminated condemned, Nightfarers from other worlds who have chosen to serve the night, and thus invade us in order to stymie our efforts. But the greatest example of those who have embraced the night come in the form of the Nightlords, the beings who serve under Heolstor. Heolstor is the night in its totality, its origin. However, the subordinate lords instead have clear domains, each representing a singular aspect of the night. We have Noster, who represents wisdom, we have Libra, who represents balance, and we have Maris, who represents the mystery that can be found within the night and the cosmos. But what I find most fascinating about these Night Lords is that they have become part of the night, a manifestation of it, and yet they once existed in the material world as separate beings. Like Heolstor, they all have different reasons for being drawn to and siding with the night. Noster is a good example of this, for their night relic reads the following: "The night belonging to Noster left upon its defeat. The secluded forest was being eaten away by the surrounding desert, and when the blessing of water passed over its many leaves and boughs, thus began a great exodus of its creatures. To survive, the insects would have to adapt. So began their prolonged and perilous journey." A couple of interesting things here to dissect. Firstly, this is the night that belonged to Heolstor. I take this to mean that each of the Nightlords rule over a night each, and each is able to bring it to bear on the lands between. In this case, Heolstor embodies the Night of the Wise. A great illustration of this is the final arena in which we face each Nightlord. You will note that they are all different, reflecting the characteristics and aesthetic of each lord. I think that this shows that each lord has a domain over their own night, so to speak. But perhaps more interestingly, it gives us an insight into Heolstor's past, in which it seemingly was just an insect trying to survive. A mole cricket and a moth who bonded together in order to survive the collapse of their ecosystem. The moth representing wisdom does feel fitting, firstly because it uses sorceries, a practice that is always associated with intelligence, science, and astrology in the Souls games. In symbolism, moths can also be associated with enlightenment, or the pursuit of knowledge, given their tendency to be drawn towards the light. Earlier we looked at the night relic for Adel, who was once a dragon, but became corrupted due to the night destroying his ecosystem. Adel's hunger would eventually drive him to madness, and his body would twist into that of a gaping jaw, a physical manifestation of his endless hunger. Adel represents the hunger of the night. Like Gnawster, Adel falls into the category of Nightlord, who became one with the night because of the destruction of their home. This is a common theme amongst all Nightlords. They each have their own reason for being drawn towards the night, whether it is survival, curiosity, or nihilism. They were all once beings of the material world, who have since become an aspect of the night. You will note that each of their titles ends with "of the night," meaning they are indeed part of it, no matter what they once were. The Nightlords are now metaphysical creatures, manifestations of the night's different elements, and yet they were once individuals from all different backgrounds and habitats. It is also worth saying that each Nightlord has a lot of story and symbolism that could be dug into, however that goes beyond the scope of this video. Curiosity is another motivating factor that could lead to one siding with the night, and such is the case with both Maris and Caligo. For example, the night relic of Maris reads the following: "The night belonging to Maris, left upon its defeat. For the first time in its existence, the drifting ancient being realized its interest had been piqued. Indeed, it had been roused from its aimless life of floating, camouflaged within its surroundings. The strange taste of this night was all too lonely, and more vast than it could ever know. Maris is an unknown cosmic creature who had essentially spent aeons floating through space fully camouflaged, until the night caught its interest, and it also gives insight to what night feels like: lonely, perhaps empty. Its title, Fathom, seems to represent curiosity or understanding something that is difficult, which represents both its own interest in the night and its own mysterious nature. Maris has come to represent the mystery of the night. Caligo likewise was drawn to the night out of curiosity, and initially I considered her to simply be an ancient dragon. After all, she does have the same physiology as one, having 4 wings and 2 forearms. However, in her night relic, it tells us that she viewed the world from above on a phantasmal peak, i.e. she roosted in some non-physical plane of existence and was able to view the world in its entirety. Again, like Maris, I see Caligo as a cosmic level being who existed beyond the material realm, whether that be space or another plane, and she merely takes the form of a dragon. It could be that she was once herself an ancient dragon who evolved to something more, but these details are not given to us. This is one of many subjects that I will discuss in more detail in a future video, that will focus on the subordinate Nightlords. Caligo's domain is very fitting as well, as she is the miasma of night. I believe the miasma being referred to is her cold mists that coat the arena in a miasma that limits our vision. Caligo represents the cold chill of night and the cosmos. Then we have the likes of Fulgor, who seems to have come to serve the night, because he needs to be a champion of something. We learn from his expedition text that he once served the gods, and his fervour for them burns still. Whoever these radiant gods are is up for debate. It is possible he once served Marika and her kin, given he is associated with her element, holy. Regardless, it is clear from his Night Relic that he was devastated by the betrayal of some of his comrades, and I imagine it was this event and this failure that led him into the arms of the Night. Fulgor wants to be a champion, a righteous shield of the gods, and now he plays that role for Night. He is the Night's champion. He represents its strength and sacred elements. Then of course we have Libra, perhaps the most interesting of all the Nightlords, named so for the scales he holds in his merchant form. Libra is simply described to us as a demon, and his Night Relic reads the following: "The Night belonging to Libra, left upon its defeat." The demon was obsessed with the concepts of impartiality, fairness, and equanimity. For anything to reach a higher plane, each side must elevate the other. The goat-eyed being gazed into the darkness. If it is true that the night swallows all, then the night is impartial. The night is a thing of fairness, of equanimity. The night is a champion of balance. So this demon is obsessed with the concepts of fairness and balance, hence the scales and reference to the astrological sign of Libra, the scale symbol of which is in turn based upon the scales of Themis, the Greek personification of justice. This is why his bargains that he offers as a merchant usually come with a downside. With the positives he offers, a negative is also attached in order to make it a balanced transaction. I would argue there is definitely an element of Faust injected into his character, with his offers being more of a Faustian bargain than the balanced Libra no doubt sees it as. Indeed, the devilish form of the character certainly does make me think of the Faustian devil. Speaking of the devil, the symbolic form of Libra also draws upon another demonic figure, Baphomet, and the inspiration is incredibly clear to see when one places them side by side. I want to shout out a really excellent thread on Twitter that breaks this down, authored by friend of the channel, Quelaag. Quelaag points out a number of other design elements that Libra takes from Baphomet, including his tie to alchemy. This is relevant for his expedition description reads the following: "A goat-headed being, who pretends to be a man, said to be able to use a dubious form of alchemy. Counterfeit gold causes loss of sanity, beckoning madness. However, those who foment madness are sure to succumb to the selfsame malady in the end. Libra's alchemy results in counterfeit gold, which manifests in the form of madness and the frenzied flame. The frenzied flame is absolutely connected to the alchemical understanding of chaos, the cosmological void state preceding the creation of the universe. The frenzied flame likewise seeks to melt down all order and matter, and return the universe to the primordial form it once occupied. Indeed, as we discussed earlier, the night could be seen as a force of chaos itself, given it is undoing time and spatial order. This all fits rather neatly, and Libra is such a great representative of what the night is. There is even more here. Alchemy's ultimate aim is to create the Philosopher's Stone, or the alchemical rebus, i.e. the reconciliation and recombination of all opposing matter. In other words, balance, and of course, this is not to mention the massive elephant in the room, which is that fact that Baphomet himself is meant to embody the idea of balance, as it is based upon the original artist's concept of alchemical reconciliation. One arm reads coagulate, the other reads dissolve. One arm is up, the other is down. It is both animal and man, and it is both feminine and masculine. In short, Libra's design is utterly perfect. A well-crafted model that blends the ideas of balance and alchemy to perfection. It is easy to believe that a being with such a singular interest would be drawn to the night. It consumes all equally, and thus it is a force of uncaring, undiscriminating fairness. Libra has now bonded with the night to become an avatar of this element of the night rune. Last but not least, we have Gladius, whose night relic suggests that he was a wolf, born with 3 heads, and as a result he was driven from his pack. However, he eventually was taken in by a man who he has remained loyal to ever since. In my mind, this absolutely has to be Heolstor, a knight who took Gladius in as his own. This would mean that after Heolstor became the Primordial Nightlord, Gladius was likely the first of his deputies. His close ties to Heolstor is also reinforced by the fact he shares the same weakness as his master, a weakness to holy weapons. Gladius is no doubt representative of the bestial, violent aspects of the Night. All of this shows that the Night Lords were not created by the Night, rather they became part of it, and they all represent its different elements, whether it be hunger, wisdom, balance, or curiosity. But there is one who stands above them all, the Primordial Nightlord, the first known to us as Heolstor. He is more than the others, for he actually bears the Night rune within his body, much like Marika does with the Elden Ring. He is the Night's true vessel, and it is to his story that we turn to next. As we have established, the Night is a complex phenomenon, and its various aspects are represented by the 7 different Night Lords, who each hold dominion over their own night. Yet most important among these is the Primordial Nightlord, who is the vessel for the rune of night itself. Heolstor's prominence above all other Night Lords is well encapsulated by his ultimate attack, where he rips open the sky and absorbs a new affinity. What actually is happening here is Heolstor is opening a door to a subordinate Night Lord's night and taking their power. You can see in the sky that it is opening up to another boss arena. He is able to use the holy power of Fulgor, the Frost of Caligo, or the Madness of Libra. He is the true lord and source of the night. Even his expedition reaffirms that he is the source of the night. In the coming chapters, I will argue that Heolstor is not simply a man who gained the power of the night. Instead, I will argue that there was indeed a man once, but Heolstor has become a complex cosmic being through various forces who have interacted with him. The Cutting-Gifted tribe likely inadvertently gave Heolstor his Erdtree cloned body. The shadow-devouring infant of the Recluse may have bonded with the Nightlord, and this is not to mention the potential involvement of the Nox and Ranni. All of these factors explain his immense power, from eroding the Erdtree to cutting open the sky and wielding the destructive power of the night in combat. That said, it is important we start with Heolstor the man, so let's get into it. Heolstor's rune describes him as the Primordial Nightlord, and most would take it to mean that the night and its lord are a primordial force in this world. This would make a lot of sense, given night and day would surely be some of the first elements of importance following creation. However, in this case, it seems as though the word primordial is being used to indicate that Heolstor is the first of all the Night Lords, that he is the source of the night, actively eroding the world. Again, I was lucky enough to have Last Protagonist's translation of this item description, in which he reveals that the original kanji is indeed meant to indicate that Heolstor is the original, or first of the lords, where each of the prior Night Lords seem to represent one element or facet of the night. Heolstor is essentially all of them combined. This can best be seen in his boss fight, where he is able to cut open the night sky and call on a different element, be it madness, frost, or holy. This reflects the metaphysical aspects of darkness or night, where they can absorb different elements and frequencies to use as their own. He is the night in its totality. His night relic tells us a decent amount about his origin story, as it reads the following. The night belonging to Heolstor, left upon its defeat. The country lay in ruin. The man who once was a knight had challenged the hero, but he too was no match. He fell just another body in a great pile, but eventually he awoke, crawling out from underneath the others. Though he had failed to protect anything or anyone, he yet lived. And so he cursed the world. It was the dead of night, and from the sky poured down a great rain. So there was once a man named Heolstor, a knight who defended his country against an invading force, and yet he was defeated by a hero, just one of many. He survived and awoke in a large pile of the bodies of his countrymen. He had failed to defend his country and his fellows, and so he cursed the world. Which country is being spoken of here, and who was the hero who struck him down? I think in the context of Elden Ring, the word hero makes one major character immediately come to mind, and that is Godfrey. For those new to Elden Ring, Godfrey was the first Elden Lord of Marika's reign, a man who is well known for his many conquests and battle prowess. When he became Marika's consort, fresh conquest awaited, as we know from Protection of the Erdtree, that many nations and factions were brought to heel during Marika's rise to power. He stood beside Marika as they brought low the civilization of the Fire Giants in a final conflict that secured the Erdtree's supremacy over the lands between. It could be any number of unnamed nations that fell to Godfrey, from which Heolstor hails. However, there is one direct example of a warrior challenging Godfrey and losing that we can find in the base game. I of course refer to the battle at Castle Morn. Morn is now a castle in the hands of Godfrey's descendant Godric. However, it clearly once was held by another faction. The sword monument that sits nearby tells us a little of this conflict, as it reads the following: The Siege of Castle Morn. A lone hero fights for his vengeance, only to fall at the hand of Lord Godfrey. This information can then be combined with the item description found in the Morn Greatsword, which reads the following: The Storied Sword of Castle Morn. A revenger's weapon, it is burdened with oceans of anger and regret. One of the legendary armaments. A lone surviving champion from a country now vanished was so determined to continue fighting that he claimed the swords of an entire clan of warriors. It wouldn't be too hard to believe that this Revenger and Heolstor were one and the same, given both are seemingly bitter about the fall of their people at the hand of a conqueror. Perhaps the Morn Revenger's story is the moments before he was defeated for the final time at Castle Morn. I personally do not believe that this is the case. I just wanted to note it here because there are certainly a lot of parallels to be made, and I would be remiss not to point it out. Instead, I believe that Heolstor is meant to be emblematic of all those who were crushed by the Erdtree conquest, and that as a result, the specific details of his origins do not matter. In this regard, he is absolutely a single-minded entity of revenge and nihilism, a being who simply marches onwards towards a singular goal, the eradication of an uncaring and cruel world. In Wilder's ending, he assumes the identity of the Nightlord, and is described as lumbering on and not caring about the things that mattered to him before, when he was human. I assume then this is the mindset of Heolstor as well. He has become single-minded, consumed, a hollow shell that is concerned with only moving ever forward and spreading the influence of the night. Returning to the Nightlord's relic, I find the final line regarding night and rain interesting, as I think it could be interpreted a couple of ways. In an attempt to understand this final line, Last Protagonist was kind enough to provide his translation of the original Japanese, and it reads the following: Eventually he awoke and crawled out. He merely remained, unable to protect anything, and so he cursed the world, with pouring rain, the dead of night. So it seems as though it was indeed this moment in which Heolstor became the Nightlord. As he cursed the world with the dead of night and pouring rain, he manifested the night in his despair. As for how this can happen so suddenly, we often find that cosmic events happen in such a manner in Elden Ring. For example, Mohg first had communion with an outer god deep underground, an event that led him to be changed forever. As I will suggest shortly, there are some hints that there could well be an outer god of night. We could speculate then that this outer god communed with Heolstor in that moment, and he became the night aspect, granted the ability to tear down the world he so despised. Powerful concepts and aspects of nature are often associated with cosmic beings known as outer gods. For example, there is the outer god of rot, a being which manifests itself on the material plane via a corrosive fluid known as the Scarlet Rot. This outer god oversees the domain of rot, decay and rebirth from death, and indeed it still manifests itself in Limveld, despite the breakdown of reality. It manifests as a scarlet rot-infested woods, the in-game description of which reads the following: a forest transformed by the power of an outer god, overrun by scarlet rot, and filled with all manner of decay. In the base game of Elden Ring, there are numerous other outer gods, which also govern other elements, like the outer god of the death rites, and the formless mother, the outer god of blood. All manifest and behave in different ways, yet all are strongly connected to the material and concept of their remit. In the Japanese script, the kanji refers to these beings as kami, the deities of the Shinto religion in Japan. Kami are spirits, or manifestations of forces of nature. Thus in Elden Ring, the outer gods are deities that also are closely aligned with a certain aspect of nature or element, and they are manifestations of that particular concept. Additionally, it was suggested to me by Mirko, a community translator, that the outer facet of their name is meant to represent the fact that this particular concept is outside of order, i.e. the concept it represents is not included in the Elden Ring. This does match up, as death, chaos, and accursed blood are excluded from the Elden Ring in this current era. Night would also fit these parameters, given Night is very much opposed to the traditional concepts found in Marika's order, one that is more closely associated with light and the sun. So it is unsurprising that there may be an outer god of night, and this possibility all comes from an item description, that being the bone-like stone, which we can see via the item description is seemingly a relic of an outer god. A fascinating relic, one that is related to the Recluse and the dark devouring infant, and soon we will return to the subject of the outer god. One final thing that I want to discuss is the two forms that Heolstor takes in his boss fight with us, the Night aspect and then the Nightlord. The Night aspect part of him seems to essentially be a vessel for the night. If you look closely, then you can see that beneath his rags he is just a shadow. He is night given form. In this stage he essentially is just marching forward, similar to his depiction in the art of the introductory cinematic. In stage 1 I think he is this lesser form of himself, because of what we discussed earlier in relation to Dr. Pikachu's Reddit post. The Nightlord has been defeated and bound before, so he is essentially crippled and bound in stage 1, held back by the wards and bindings inflicted upon him by the Nightfarers. It is only when he breaks free of his bindings that his true form is finally unleashed in stage 2 of his fight. Stage 2 seems to be Heolstor in his true unbound form, stepping out from the Night aspect shell so that he might defend himself. It is in this form that we need to defeat him, because we can plainly see the Night rune within his chest. This rune must be contained in order to bring an end to the cataclysm. Yet Heolstor seems to have a third form, does he not? The giant tree titans that herald his knight's approach and that seemingly contain his form back in the real world. This brings us to another party that played a big role in Nightreign Story, the mysterious Cutting Gifted tribe, and it is them that we will assess in the next chapter. Well, this brings us back to the opening segment of this video, where I teased a critical translation by Last Protagonist. In the base game English version, the item description for the Night rune mentions a Cutting Gifted tribe, who foresaw the coming of the night, and tried to prevent its arrival by cheating a god. In the process of attempting to do so, they somehow committed a trespass that revealed the sin of the Erd Tree, resulting in their punishment. Now the term Cutting Gifted is only mentioned in one other item description in the game, and it is in the ultra rare item, the Cord End. The item description for which reads the following: a carefully woven cord. This cord belonged to the young girls who were housed in a place that was meant as an eternal secret. The cutting-gifted tribe vowed to sacrifice their flesh while concealing the truth, but the girls were too young to oblige, so we can already see some common themes popping up when we talk about this tribe. They seem to be taking some drastic steps in order to trick a god or conceal the truth. This is also in line with the rewards that you get from using the cord to open a secret crypt. 3 sacrificial twigs, objects that are used in order to cheat death a single time. Additionally, as you will note, these sacrificial twigs are cuttings of the Erd tree, and with this we can begin to understand what cutting gifted might actually be referring to. Tree cloning, the act of creating a tree replica by using a cutting from another tree. This is how Last Protagonist translates the original Japanese of the Primordial Nightlord's rune, and I will now quote his translation. A thing which has the same qualities of a great rune that resided within the Primordial Nightlord. The tree cloning tribe spent many years preparing. In order to stop the coming night, they had no choice but to resort to extraordinary methods with which they would deceive the gods. That was the sin levied upon the clan, which had glimpsed the sins of the Erd tree. So let's put all of this together and spell it out, lay out what we know, to try and unjumble the lore of this tribe. There was a tribe who were known for cutting trees and cloning them. They foresaw the coming of the night and they wanted to avoid it. They would then use their skills and go to extraordinary lengths to try and prevent this, by deceiving the gods. Young girls were sacrificed in order to conceal the truth of their practices, that being that they had the audacity to cut branches from the Erd tree itself. Yet cutting a tree is only part of it. Remember, they are the clan that creates clones of trees. And thus we get to a startling conclusion. This tribe was taking cuttings from the Erd tree in order to create a clone of it. A clone of the Erd tree that would trick the gods and somehow avoid the night. So how would this work? Well, consider how the sacrificial twig itself is used, a small part of the Erd tree that is used as a sort of totem for death, absorbing the penalty of such and dying on behalf of its bearer. What if this tribe wanted to create another such totem? A bigger one, a full-size clone of the Erd tree, which would draw the night to it instead of the Erd tree proper. Would this perhaps take the calamity far away from the lands between? If this is the case, then where is this clone? Where is this totem? Well, there is one main giant tree-like structure that comes to mind, the tree titan that we see in-game and at the true ending of the game. What if the tree cloning clan were responsible for creating this massive wicker man as a totem that was meant to attract and then contain the night? Where else could this tree-like titan have come from? I would argue that this plan worked for a time, and that the Nightlord was contained within this new vessel, at least until order was shattered. Then the Nightlord was drawn back towards the lands between, which is why this form is so close to the lands between at the end of the game. The evidence that this tree titan is the Nightlord comes from the skybox of Limveld itself. As the Nightlord advances, multiple titans become clearer and clearer on the horizon. They start as shadow forms, but then near the night's end they are more corporeal, taking the same form as the tree titan at the end of the game. They also seem to march in the same direction of night's advance, making it pretty clear that what we are seeing is an aspect of the night. Additionally, the game seems to end with this titan leaving, and to me the significance of this moment is lost if this is not the Nightlord. To reiterate, I believe the tree cloning tribe used a cutting from the Erd tree to create a clone. It was then used much as a sacrificial twig would be, as a totem for the night, and thus the Nightlord was drawn to this wicker giant instead of the real Erd tree. Remember, as I speculated earlier, Heolstor is a man overcome with bitterness, and I believe he likely blames his suffering on Godfrey and Marika's Erd tree order. As such, I believe the Erd tree would be his specific target, and it makes sense to me that he could be tricked by a false copy of the tree. For a time the night was distracted, yet when order collapsed, the Nightlord, now inhabiting this vessel, made his way to the lands between, and thus brought calamity upon it. Yet it seems now that the Nightlord has claimed this Erdtree clone for his own, piloting it. I suggest that the false tree did draw the Nightlord for a time, but now he has co-opted the clone, and it has become part of his form. Remember, the night is a force that consumes and absorbs, and as such it is very possible that Heolstor would consume this tree and absorb it into his being, likely an unforeseen consequence of the cutting gifted tribe's plan. Consider that. This Nightlord now has augmented his strength with that of an Erdtree clone. No wonder he is such a world-ending event. In many ways then, the cutting gifted tribe are responsible for the current form the Nightlord takes, and I believe this is why they are mentioned in his rune. Consider how important this item is to the story, and the item description speaks not of the Nightlord, but this tribe. It shows how important they are to the foundational events of this story, and I believe it goes a bit further. We also learn that they were punished for some perceived sin. Again, there are no definitive answers to this question. However, we know that those who look more closely at the Erdtree often see through the dogma of the Golden Order and its claims to divinity. Goldmask learns that Marika is not the one true god, that she and her lord consort are one and the same, that she was as fickle as any mortal, being the Elden Ring's custodian, but then also later shattering it. Gideon had an audience with the two fingers and saw into the mind of Marika. He likely realised the horrifying truth, that the two fingers and their mother had lost contact with the greater will long ago. Their guidance, their claim to divine connection was all a lie, and so too is the order that is built upon their guidance. Then we have Miquella, Marika's own child, who learned the truth of the Erdtree's founding and of the lies of Shadow. He learned of the original sin of Queen Marika, in which she overthrew the Hornsent, and was able to claim divinity not through divine right, but because she utilised a man-made gate of divinity. Any one of these facts could be the sin of the Erdtree referred to in the Primordial Nightlord's rune, a secret discovered by the tribe during their close encounter with the sacred tree, a truth they were not meant to know. However, if I was to hone in on a particular sin, I would suggest that it is likely tied to Shadow of the Erdtree and the truths that we found there. Both Nightreign and Shadow of the Erdtree will have been developed in tandem, evidenced by the presence of the Golden Hippo in Nightreign, which is an expansion-only boss. I therefore think it is very likely that there will have been some dialogue between the two teams to make sure that there was at least some coherence between the two games. Additionally, the language regarding sin does seem very similar to that used in Miquella's Great Rune, which also refers to the sin of Marika and the Erdtree, which to me is a reference to Marika's usurpation and betrayal of the Hornsent, where she drew Godfrey and his warriors to her side, warriors that had once been members of Hornsent society. The Erdtree and Marika stole divinity, and yet in the modern era of the Golden Order, it is believed that Marika is the one true god, when in fact she took it by force, and so then could any potential rival. Perhaps the tree-cutting tribe learned of the Erdtree's origins in the process of cloning it, or perhaps they learned of its dual nature, and thus learned of the Lands of Shadow. As always, I would welcome your thoughts on what the tribe discovered in the comments below. To be honest, it isn't that important as to the specifics of the reasons behind their punishment. All we need to know is that it was linked to their tampering with the Erdtree. Perhaps what is more important is how they were punished. This now brings me to the Round Table hold and the mausoleum found in its lower reaches. In the mausoleum we have a number of epitaphs that attest to the occupants of these tombs, as well as the founding of the Nightfarers. Let's read the first of these epitaphs, the central one, which reads the following: "To atone for the first sin, we elect to become the Foundation." So a group of people, presumably buried in this crypt, became the first of the Nightfarers, to atone for a sin. Already this is sounding like the sin of the Cutting Gifted tribe, and I would suggest that they are atoning for their sin in creating the Nightlord Titan, by being responsible for the fight back against the Nightlord. You will also note that there are 8 tombs here, 8 tombs for the 8 Nightfarers, and there are a couple of ways to interpret this. The first and most obvious is that these are the actual bodies of the Nightfarers we play. Again, I do not need to reiterate that time is in flux here, but the discordant nature of reality makes such things possible. In the introduction, we learn from the priestess that each Nightfarer is here for redemption of some kind, and thus they are here not only to atone for the first sin of the cutting gifted tribe, but for their own personal reasons.
I am told that each of you has committed a grave misdeed, but I beg to differ. You aim to preserve this very land, and that is no small matter.
Perhaps this pact was made long ago by these 8, and they were buried here, with their alternate and out-of-time versions of themselves still existing and fighting the night. However, I don't necessarily find this explanation satisfying, and I prefer to think of the 8 that are buried here were the first of many, and that over time they have been replaced by those who are worthy and seeking redemption. Which explanation you choose is up to you, but what I find to be of more importance is the 2 other epitaphs found on 2 of the caskets. They read the following: "The ways of cutting point to the deep woods. Bestow branches to those who are worthy and wise. The ways of cutting point to Windwale Knoll. Bestow branches to those who wander and roam." The ways of the cutting are a clear reference to the cutting gifted tribe and their practices, and yet each of these graves seems to indicate a relationship to another 2 groups that we know quite well. The Deep Woods are a clear reference to Recluse, as her journal makes reference to them as her place of origin. The Windwale Knoll is a reference to Wilder and Duchess's nomadic tribe, who are from this region. This seemingly suggests that there is a connection between these 2 groups and the cutting gifted tribe. My suggestion would be this: these 2 groups have their origins in the cutting gifted tribe, but over time they broke apart and became their own distinct cultures. If this is true, then there is culpability in both the Recluse's and Duchess's ancestry, and perhaps all of those found in the mausoleum are members of the cutting gifted tribe, the first 8 Nightfarers who were set against the night in order to atone for their sins. Further evidence that the foundations of this round table are formed by the tribe comes from the room itself, as it is very similar in appearance to the secret cord-end doors that we discussed earlier, a sort of pale wooden hollow. This is also the case with the Spirit Shelter, which is a copy of a divine tower from the base game, except it is formed of the same pale wooden growth. In the secret cave, it seems as though the wooden growth is spiralling outwards from the maiden as if she is the source. Perhaps the tree cloning process of this tribe is darker than we thought, that it requires a blood sacrifice or a life in order to gestate an effective clone. The item description of the cord end implies that these maidens, sacrificed by the tribe, were too young to truly agree to what was being asked of them. We also didn't confirm what the cord itself was used for. However, if you look at the hands of the maiden within this cave, then you will note that there is a cord bound around their wrists. Perhaps then it is like a rosary, a religious object meant to give them comfort and mark them as chosen. After all, you are denied entry to this cave if you don't have one, and are given the following message: "Only opens for those who wield merit." All of this points to a highly ritualistic process, through which the tribe could clone trees and protect their secrets. And I do believe the wood growth spiraling out from the maiden suggests that they are able to clone their trees through the use of a sacrifice. Perhaps those who became the foundation for this round table hold did so in a literal fashion, giving their bodies so that this building could be formed and then powered via grace. This is why the Spirit Shelter is a combination of a gold tree and this pale wooden divine tower. It is both the Erd Tree and the cutting gifted tribe assisting us in our quest, providing us a last sanctuary before we face the Nightlord. Over time, these original Nightfarers would need to be replaced, and eventually none of the cutting tribe would exist anymore. Thus, Nightfarers would need to be sought from those less directly connected to that original tribe. Recluse, Duchess, and Wilder all come from the tribe's offshoots, and so their inclusion makes sense. I believe some evidence that these Nightfarers are not the first comes from the torn out paper scrap, a quest item in which Wilder learns the truth of the priestess's role at Round Table. The first line of its item description reads the following: "A scrap of paper detailing the new night, written in the tongue of an ancient people." This is a document written in the tongue of an ancient people, and it doesn't speak of the Duchess specifically, rather the position of priestess. I would suggest that the Duchess is not the first to hold this position, just the newest. This note is very unlikely to be written by one of the current Nightfarers, and thus I suggest this is a note written by an original Nightfarer, one from the Cutting Gifted tribe, who also pondered how they could save their priestess. We will speak more of the Round Table at the end of the video, but the fact that a descendant of that original tree cloning tribe is the leader of the Nightfarers makes a whole load of sense to me. Indeed, there is actually a text that is found in Round Table that implies a connection between those first Nightfarers and the current ones. It can be found near the jar shop, and it reads the following: "A short passage on the underground crypt. We lie the condemned of the first nightfall, whose sin is too great for absolution by our own deeds. Thus we shall ever guide our progeny until the night breaks." Again, it feels like it is a reference to the Cutting Gifted tribe, a group who committed a sin and thus were condemned. If that is true, then this note suggests that the tribe were the first Nightfarers, and they laid the foundation for the Round Table hold and the new Nightfarers. It also suggests that they expected their descendants to carry on the fight, which is certainly the case when we consider Duchess, Wilder, and Recluse, who seem to be connected to the tribe. Interestingly as well, it implies that they were aware that their sentence would be passed on to their descendants, the concept of ancestral guilt, which is certainly present in other Souls games. Perhaps the rest of the symbolic 8 are just chosen because of their potential and need for personal redemption, or we could try and argue that they too are connected to the Cutting tribe's original sin. Guardian failed to protect his people from Recluse's dark magic that perhaps has its origins in the Cutting Gifted tribe's practices, given her people are an offshoot of them. The rest all have some indirect connection to the night, whether they are victims of it or are seeking something connected to it. Perhaps they all believe they are here for their own reasons, when in reality they are all being guided by fate and are bound by that original sin of the Cutting Gifted tribe. Ultimately, this is why I believe the Cutting Gifted tribe feature in the item description for such an important item. It is because they were so critical in forming the current calamity. It was they who built the Nightlord's great wooden vessel, and it is they who lead the fight back against the Knight's advance. With that said, and some kind of explanation offered for the tree cloning tribe and the tree titan, I would like to discuss the next subject that I believe is relevant for trying to understand Heolstor, and that is the involvement of the Recluse and her darkness-devouring infant. In the Recluse's storyline, we learn that in the past, she used magic to create a certain being, a child which was attracted to and devoured darkness. She and her fellows called this being the Gnawling. We learn from her journal that she created it, and that her friend, the Witch of the Wheel, nursed it and was in charge of its feeding. She has actually come here, to the lands between, in order to find her beloved infant. She willingly became a Nightfarer so that she can once again find this child, and her reasoning for being here makes sense, for it is a being that is attracted to darkness, and thus the Nightlord would be a likely target for it. Chapter 5 of her journal tells us a little of its hunger for shadow, as it reads the following: "I am certain after mine infant disappeared that day, it must have had an audience with the Nightlord. It ravened as if its appetite knew no bound. It would devour shadows of any stripe. The Nightlord's own shade surely seemed irresistible to it, What must have become of my creature after it did feast? So quite a lot of information there. Firstly, confirming the notion that she came here because she deduced that her child would have been attracted to the Nightlord, given it is a large source of shadow for it to feast upon. So to be clear, it seems as though this being was created by the witch, and the Nightlord already existed by the time this child travelled to the lands between. Indeed, in Journal Entry 2, she specifically mentions having tracked it via a magical trail. She knows that it is somewhere in the jumbled mess of Limveld. It also confirms the being's specific dietary requirements, and that it disappeared on a certain day. We learn more about this disappearance event in Journal Entry 6, which reads the following: The demise of the Witch of the Wheel. During a great clash of armies, the infant overran the enemy, devouring their shadows. It was then that it lost itself, and bared its fangs at us. With time I have come to understand. It was yet young and afraid, and I did not think to take it in my arms, to offer it comfort of any kind. The price I paid was the loss of an old friend. I still remember clear as day her remains, shorn of any shadow. So again, a really detailed instance of direct storytelling here, and we get a full picture of how events unfolded. The recluse and her fellow witch unleashed the infant once more upon an enemy army, and it absolutely obliterated them, harvesting their shadow and leaving shorn remains behind. However, when it was done, its hunger wasn't sated, and so it turned upon its handlers, leading to the death of the recluse's friend, the Witch of the Wheel. The recluse now recognises that their infant turned on them because she mistreated it. She used it only as a weapon for war, and thus it began to behave in an uncontrollable manner. She did not treat it as the child it was, or give it the love it needed, and as such she has come to the lands between to rectify this error. I find the recluse to be a fascinating character in general. The impression I get is that she once was a witch who practiced the dark arts for good reasons, but war pushed her into turning her arts into weapons, resulting in her using cursed weapons against the Pinion folk, and raising a dark, devouring child without love or care. I think she now regrets all of these acts, and as such, she is a very caring and mentoring figure within the Round Table Hold, being a teacher and confidant to both the Guardian and the Revenant. But returning to the child, we need to ask, what exactly is it, and how does it now relate to the Nightlord? We do get a glimpse of it near the end of the game, a sort of silvery phantasmal being that clearly isn't a natural creature. When the recluse is discussing it with the Iron Medial, it is described as a shadow hatchling. We additionally come across some further items associated with this child, such as the Vestige of Night, which the recluse then comments on in her journal, saying, teeth marks found in the Night Shard, alongside the Vestige of Night found embedded in the Round Table Hold. Both seem to radiate an ancient magic, which I myself imbued. The Night Shard is the object we looked at earlier, a crystallized form of night. It is the teeth marks of the child in which she senses her ancient magic. The Vestige of Night seems to be a cutting of the same bindings found on the Night aspect's body. As we mentioned earlier, I believe that the Nightlord has been defeated before, and that the recluse had a hand in binding it following this defeat. She pinned its hand to its chest using a Nectaris blade, and she has mummified it in magical bindings that contain it. This is why the Night aspect stage of the final fight is so weak, because it is being held back and weakened by the recluse's magic. The fact that the recluse senses the child's essence from these same rags suggests that the Nightlord and the child are related. As we will discuss shortly, I believe this is because the infant and Heolstor have bonded together, and thus it isn't surprising that the child's touch is also detected upon these rags. We can see that it is found in the exact spot we eventually find the child. By this point in the video, one must realise that time and space is not working as it should, and so the recluse was likely able to find this rag because the child would eventually lie here. Both the Shard and the Vestige of Night are touched by the ancient magic of the recluse, and both also are associated with the child. Thus our conclusion must be that the child is a creation of the Recluse's spellcraft. I didn't get into it earlier, but the reason it is believed that the bindings on the night aspect are the work of the Recluse is because of the inscriptions on them. The vestige of night is also described as having inscriptions on it, put there by a sealing stone. The implication being is that this is magic meant to seal something away, leading us to conclude that these inscriptions are the work of the Recluse, who cast these upon the Nightlord upon an alternate victory, a battle she clearly doesn't remember because of the flux in time. When you cast her ultimate, Soul Blood Song, you can see that it causes red blood ribbons to flow around her. On these ribbons there seems to be writing, inscriptions, that are very similar to those seen on the vestige of night. Of course we do not need to speculate as to Recluse being the source of the vestige and the bindings, for she herself admits in page 5 of her journal that the vestige seems to radiate a magic that she herself cast. On a Twitter thread, Quelag made a great observation, comparing the marks to those found on the black knife print, noting that they looked similar. This is truly interesting to me because it makes me wonder if there is a connection between the Recluse and the Snowy Crone who taught Ranni. As I have maintained through various videos, I believe that the Snowy Crone taught Ranni occult secrets, and it was through such knowledge that Ranni was able to organise the Night of the Black Knives.
I stole a fragment of the Rune of Death, and used it to forge the god-slaying black knives through fearsome rite.
She created the black knives through occult rite, and even the ritual through which she splits the Rune of Death between her and Godwyn smacks of the occult, and I believe all of this was taught to her by the Snowy Crone. The practices of the Recluse also feel very occult-like, blood magic that can be used to help or harm. Both the Recluse and the Snowy Crone are also described as being from the deep woods. The Recluse says as such in her first journal entry. The Snowy Crone is also described as being from the deep woods, in the item description of her clothing, so it is impossible not to see the relation. Perhaps the Snowy Crone is a descendant of the Recluse's people, thus the similarities between the knife print and the magics of the Recluse would make sense. Ranni's puppet appearance is said to mimic that of the Snowy Crone, and it is hard to deny that there is a similarity in the clothes worn, for both the Crone and Recluse. The infant is ultimately an artificial being, crafted by ancient magic, and it highlights how powerful and knowledgeable the Recluse is. Perhaps the infant's silver form is evidence of a similar process to the Noxian creation of the Albinaurics and the Silver Tears, in which alchemical processes were used to form silver-based life forms, onto which the Recluse cast magic to create this creature. So we know enough about the creature's creation. However, I now need to address the elephant in the room. Are the Nightlord and the infant one and the same? Did the Nightlord grow from this being? I believe the answer is no, or at least it is not that simple. However, the confusion is certainly warranted thanks to some dialogue found in the Recluse's quest. After the Recluse discovers the Witch of the Whale has been masquerading as the Iron Medial, she finds the real Medial and wakes him from unconsciousness. She then catches him up on events and the infant itself. The Medial then vocalizes a summary of what the witch has told him, and he says the following.
Now, as you tell it, the Nightlord grew from a shadow hatchling. If that is true, then there may indeed be some degree of culpability. But can we unquestioningly assume that a single enchanted organism could mature so fantastically? I must say, I doubt that it could be so simple.
So here we hear the medial state, that the Recluse now believes that her child grew into the Nightlord, and there is no doubt that the creature is connected to the antagonist. As I mentioned earlier, the wraps that made up the vestige of night seem to be wrapped around the Nightlord, as if her infant has indeed matured into this form while still wearing the wraps. Additionally, in doing the quest, the Witch of the Whale hints that in order to free the infant, we may need to kill the Nightlord, implying that they are one and the same.
Indeed. How should I put this? Canst thou thine own child slay?
However, the notion that the Shadow Infant grew into the Nightlord contradicts many other facts that we know. Even the medial in the aforementioned dialogue seems to think that it cannot be that simple. Additionally, in other journal entries, the Recluse has been clear that her infant was drawn here by the Nightlord's dark power. So how could that make any sense if the infant is also the Nightlord? Indeed, we find evidence that the infant feasted upon shards of night, meaning the night's current cataclysm was already underway by the time it reached the lands between. The Nightlord had to exist already by the time the infant came here. Additionally, as we discussed in the Heolstor chapter, we know that the base vessel for the Nightlord was a man who was once a knight, a character that has its own story, completely separate from that of the shadow-hatched infant. So how do we reconcile all of this? Why did the Recluse believe the Nightlord and the infant were one and the same? Why do we need to defeat the Nightlord in order to free the infant in the first place? Why does the Nightlord have rags that are imbued with the Recluse's magic? Well, I think that the only conclusion that makes sense is that the infant became part of the Nightlord after it had an audience with it. It bonded with the Nightlord, and thus when the Recluse destroys it, the infant is freed and restored to as it was. Perhaps this is why the infant's inscribed rags now cover Heolstor's body, because it is somewhere inside there. There do seem to be some hints that the infant is indeed an aspect or part of the Nightlord. I find it interesting that the medial questions whether a single being could grow into something as powerful as the Nightlord. Indeed, I agree, I do not think we are looking at a single being. As I stated earlier, I believe that the Nightlord is the culmination of multiple factors combining to create this fantastical force, of which Heolstor is only one component part. I believe the infant bonded with and augmented the Nightlord's strength and remains in there somewhere. A rather interesting event happens during the course of the Recluse's quest. After we have discovered the Witch of the Wheel's duplicity, we wake up the Iron Medial. He then tells us that while he was dreaming, he seemingly had an interaction with the Nightlord as he says the following.
While unconscious, I had a dream. I was handed this by the Nightlord. Well, I didn't see our foe per se, but I know it to be true. I sense a great power within. Power enough to change a person's fate, I do believe.
So this stone was given to the Medial to be given to the Recluse, given by the Nightlord. A stone that has the ability to change someone's fate. I will argue now that I believe it is the infant from within the Nightlord, whatever of it remains, that reached out to the Medial and handed over this stone. I believe the infant is within the Nightlord and wishes to be free, and so is guiding the Recluse to save it. Indeed, in her journal entry, the Recluse states that she can hear the voice of the child from the stone, as if whatever remains of it is calling out to her for help. Let us read the item description of the bone-like stone again. A disturbing stone with a distinct lifelessness. The bone of an outer god with the power to expunge divine essence, but that can also be destroyed by the same essence. The choice was left to the witch, as per the wishes of the one who bestowed it. So this stone was given to the witch so she could make a choice, and this was the wishes of the one who had it passed to her. Again, I believe this to be the infant element of the Nightlord, reaching out to her and giving her the tools to free her. The bone-like stone has the power to expunge the divine essence of an outer god. The outer god I believe to be connected to the Nightlord. In doing so, perhaps the Recluse will eliminate all traces of Heolstor, and thus free the infant, rather than destroying both together. I think we find further evidence in the infant reaching out from within the Nightlord, in the Witch of the Wheel herself. When we confront her and question her on how she can even be alive, she tells us that she has the Nightlord to thank for being revived in this form. It's clear she essentially is a creation of the night, as when we first reveal her, we can see a sort of night effect surrounding her. Additionally, she seems to fade away after the Nightlord is defeated, once again reinforcing the fact she is a shade conjured by the night. At the end of the Recluse's story, after we have freed the child from the Nightlord and finally embraced it, the Witch of the Wheel thanks the Recluse for finally giving their knight love. I believe that it was the infant element of the Nightlord that resurrected the Witch of the Wheel, as without her, the Recluse would never have discovered the truth, nor received the relic necessary to free the infant. The infant used the Witch of the Wheel as its agent to communicate with the Recluse. After all, it was the one who devoured her shadow. Is it not plausible that it was able to give life to the fragment of her that it once consumed? To be clear, I think that the infant has truly become part of the Nightlord, but somewhere deep within him remains a fragment of its original awareness, which is reaching out to the Recluse. Perhaps the Nightlord even became more powerful once it was able to absorb the infant. After all, it is the product of incredible sorcery. Ultimately, we do not know what the Nightlord's powers were like before this encounter, but I would like to believe that the infant likely boosted the Lord's power. That is my explanation as to the relationship between the dark devouring infant of the Recluse and Heolstor. I believe it is likely that they merged, but both still have their separate origins. I believe that the Recluse is able to reunite with the infant by defeating Heolstor and using the bone-like stone to separate the two entities, ultimately freeing the child from within the Nightlord. As to the mechanics of how this works, I believe that the stone's item description is key in understanding this. It says it is able to expunge divine essence, a term that is often used in relation to the outer gods. It is used once in the base game, in the item description of the map of the Lake of Rot. In the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, similar language is also used in relation to the outer gods, found in Romina's Remembrance, the Great Rot Pot, and the Outer God heirloom. Last Protagonist also was able to confirm that in the original kanji, the same word is used in each of these instances, and they are all tied to the outer gods. Divine Essence then is essentially the material or presence of an outer god. If the bone-like stone is being used by the Recluse to expunge an outer god's influence to free the infant, my conclusion is that the Nightlord's form is in part made from an outer god's divine essence. Earlier we touched on the fact that Heolstor may have been empowered by an outer god of night, when he cursed the world that fateful night, and it is this facet of the Recluse's story that has led me to conclude so. Already we can see how complex the Nightlord is, a man influenced by cosmic forces, who perhaps consumed an Erdtree clone and then bonded with a shadow-devouring magical creature. Has there ever before been such an interplay of different forces in one character? Yet we still have more to talk about, for we cannot discuss a Lord of Night without revisiting our good old friends, the Nox. So let's look at what we have so far before we further complicate matters. Heolstor was once a knight, and when his homeland was attacked, he was powerless to prevent its destruction, and in his despair, he cursed the world. At this moment his curse manifested as the Nightreign, and yet it would take some time for him to come to the lands between. His progress was diverted by the interference of the Cutting Gifted tribe, who created an Erdtree clone, which in time would become his new vessel. Then the shattering would occur, and the collapse of order would draw the Nightlord to the lands between. The night would settle over the land, and new lords would be drawn to the night, and so the reign of the Nightlords would begin. The Cutting Gifted tribe, condemned for their crimes against the Erdtree, would create the foundations of a new fellowship that would be dedicated to eradicating this threat, the Nightfarers. Yet we have to address the Nox, who were an entire society seemingly focused on bringing about the reign of a Lord of Night. The source for this of course come from the Noxian armour sets, which read the following. Long ago the Nox invoked the ire of the Greater Will, and were banished deep underground. Now they live under a false night sky, in eternal anticipation of their liege, of the coming age of the stars, and their Lord of Night. Now, one explanation is that the Lord of Night of the Nox is not the same thing as the Nightlord. And I do actually think there is a lot of merit to this argument. My main reason for championing this hypothesis is because the Nox want the Age of Stars, and that is the name of Ranni's ending in the base game. What is happening in Nightreign is not the Age of Stars. In fact, if the Nightlord has his way, there will never again be another age of anything. The world instead will be destroyed, whereas in Ranni's Age of Star we see a very different type of rule, and I believe she is the true Lord of Night that the Nox were anticipating. I think that the Night as a concept already existed in Elden Ring, a primordial force of reality, and this is why the Sellians were able to tap into its power and create the Night sorceries. It's just that Heolstor has formed a very specific interpretation of its power, based on his nihilistic desire to curse the world. And again, credit to my script editor Ash for this observation regarding the Night sorceries. Hence why Ranni and the Nox interpret the Night's dominion in a very different fashion. That being said, just because the Nightlord isn't their intent, doesn't mean they didn't have a role in his arrival here. We cannot deny that the Nox feature heavily in Nightreign, with an entire eternal city finding its way into the churn of Limveld, and numerous Nox-related bosses and enemies. As I have argued in various videos, it seems as though the Nox have had various aborted attempts to artificially create the Lord of Night, through alchemical means as in the case with the Silver Tears, Mimic Tears, and the Albinaurics. There are also the Dragonkin soldiers, abominations born in the Eternal Cities that tried to mimic the power of the ancient dragons. Again, something I see as an attempt to artificially manufacture a Lord of Night. Additionally, the Nox clearly tried to beckon cosmic beings. We learn from the Memory Stone item description that a black moon once hung above the city. Then, of course, Astel, a malformed star, descended on one of the cities and obliterated it, and given their predisposition to the cosmos, I have always maintained that it was likely the Nox's own actions that brought Astel here. So at a basic level, perhaps we can surmise that the Nox were responsible for beckoning Heolstor to these lands, that in trying to reach out to cosmic entities, they made contact with him. We could look at the Nightlord's visual design in order to speculate further on Noxian involvement. When looking at his model closely, one can note his armour seems to be made of silver. Now, the unique form his armour takes could simply be the result of the Knight's influence, his constant contact with it warping it beyond recognition. Indeed, you will note that the armour seems to be pointing in one direction, as if it has been pushed and shaped that way by the Night's tide as the Nightlord continues to walk against it. However, what if this silver armour is the work of Nox alchemy, given many of their creations resemble this same silver, like the Silver Tears and even their silver weapons? In fact, both of these things could be true. It could be the work of the Nox, and then it was later warped by the effect of the Night. This is complete speculation, of course, but the silver armour really caught my eye, and I can't help but wonder if this could be further proof that the Nox interacted with and assisted the Nightlord. We also need to consider the Carrion connection, for it is hard to miss the fact that Heolstor is wielding an iconic weapon, the only weapon that seems to be his own, unlike the others which were used to bind him. I of course refer to the Moonlight Greatsword, which he wields to great effect, channeling the power of the Night through it. So how did he get this weapon? Well, we know that this is a practice of the queens and princesses of Carrion royalty, to give their chosen consort, as we ourselves can receive one as Ranni's consort, and likewise Radagon received one from Rennala, before modifying it into the Golden Order Greatsword. So how did Heolstor get his hands on one? Well, we know that there were other princesses of Caria beyond Rennala and Ranni. I have long theorized that the Three Sisters' Rise is emblematic of Ranni and two unknown sisters. Then of course the DLC confirmed the presence of Rennala's sister R'hllana, albeit she clearly has loyalty to Sir Messmer, for whom she gave up her own claim to royalty. So there is the possibility that Heolstor was consort to one of these other lunar princesses. However, I don't believe that to be the case. Rather, I suspect Ranni's involvement here, and I will explain why. As I have explained in numerous videos, Ranni has ties to the Eternal Cities. I have speculated in the past that the underground passage that runs from Moonlight Altar and Noxtella suggests a relationship and exchange of ideas between the two cultures. Indeed, the Church of Vows in Liurnia, a carrion building meant to wash away the amnesty between the Erdtree and Caria, prior to their houses being joined, has Nox statues within it. Additionally, the celestial dew that was used for this ritual was again a Noxian creation. This is not the only Church of the Carians we find with Noxian statues, and a strong relationship between these two cultures should not be a surprise, given they are both societies who observe the fate of the stars. Additionally, Ranni would then work with those of the Eternal Cities to create the Black Knife Assassins in a bid to overthrow Marika's brood. Of course, Ranni was merely using the assassins, so she could separate her soul from her Empyrean body, but the point remains that at one stage, Ranni cooperated with the Nox. Again, this is unsurprising as both parties ultimately moved towards the same goal, the Age of Stars. So what if both Ranni and the Nox saw potential in Heolstor, a nascent Nightlord, following the calamity that befell his land? We could suggest then that the Nox beckoned Heolstor here, and Ranni made him her consort, arming him with the Moonlight Greatsword. We also need to consider another object of significance that I have more or less ignored up until now, the rune of the Primordial Nightlord. In its description, it states that it has properties similar to a great rune, suggesting that it is not a great rune that came from the shattering of the Elden Ring. This certainly makes sense from a timeline perspective, as I suggested earlier that Heolstor's origins date back to the Erdtree Conquest Wars, far before the shattering. So this rune came from elsewhere, and this is consistent with the base game lore, as we do see runes coming from other sources, often being gestated by those with the power or knowledge to do so. Godwyn, Goldmask and Dung Eater all gestate their own mending runes, albeit none of those are on the same power level of Heolstor's rune. I am merely illustrating the fact that runes can come from places other than the shattered Elden Ring. The easiest and most likely explanation for its origin is that the rune was gestated when Heolstor became the Nightlord. He is so representative of a certain power and concept that a rune formed within him. If I am also right about Heolstor having a patron outer god, then it really isn't too difficult to believe that he would have gestated his own rune. However, there is the possibility that this rune was created or granted to him, perhaps by the Nox and Ranni coalition we have been discussing. Given what we have said about the Nox and their proficiency in alchemy and artificial life, it isn't too hard to believe that they would have been able to fashion such a relic for Heolstor. There is another common theory that I should address, the idea that Ranni discarded her great rune and placed it on the moon. This idea has been circulating for many years now, with many people trying to sketch the outline of this rune based on the moon's contours. While I have never really subscribed to this belief, it is hard to deny that some of these traces found on the moon do look similar to the Primordial Nightlord's rune. I personally lean towards the idea that the rune was gestated within him, due to his deep connection to the night, but I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Of course, if the Nox and Ranni did help Heolstor, I very much doubt that either party could have foreseen how destructive the Lord of Night would be. What is happening in Limveld is not the predicted Age of Stars. Doubtless anyone could have seen the malice and regret that Heolstor held in his heart due to the loss of his people. Ranni wishes to oversee an order of detached logic. Heolstor wishes to see the world that caused him pain to be unmade. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, even more than in the base game, my analysis of Heolstor is highly speculative, based mainly off a couple of item descriptions, some analysis of his design, and reading between the lines. Let's consider, however, that everything I've said is true, or at least close to the truth. Then it is no wonder that Heolstor is such a world-ending event. This is a being who boasts the power of a great rune, has hijacked an Erdtree clone, has bonded with a shadow hatchling, and has been gifted a Moonlight Greatsword. Like the Knight itself, Heolstor is a multifaceted being. Whoever Heolstor once was, he is long gone. The fleshy left arm on the Nightlord confirms that this being was once a man, but he is so transformed there is barely anything left of that original man. Indeed, during Wilder's ending, we can get a close look at Heolstor's body. The visual implication could not be more clear. Heolstor is nothing more than a shell anymore. The man he once was has been hollowed out and replaced by the Knight. This is also reflected in how the Japanese version of the game presents Heolstor's name. In a Reddit post, user Alan Jenk pointed out that the name can be more closely translated to nameless, which I find to be very fitting. As I noted earlier, Heolstor's specific origin doesn't really matter. He is emblematic of those defeated in wars. He is a karmic response to the violence wrought by Marika in her conquests. Whoever this man was has been eroded, stripped of his personality and soul by the Knight, a husk and an amalgamation of different influences. So many forces have interacted with and transformed him that there is now only the Knight. A bitter, nihilistic and vengeful force that will bring ruin to the lands between. This was the future the cutting gifted tribe wanted to avert, yet as is so often the case in fiction, there is no cheating fate. Like in Elden Ring, our base of operations is the Round Table Hold, and in both games the Round Table Hold we use is a spatial and temporal phenomena that is powered by Grace. It makes sense that Grace is the patron to the protagonist of both games, because ultimately we are agents of the Erdtree, the only chance to restore order in both cases. The Tarnished are directed to repair the Elden Ring and restore order, and the Nightfarers are fighting back against the Knight in order to restore the Erdtree and the lands between. I find it very interesting that in the case of Nightreign, the grace begins to fade. This is a large focus of the Executor's questline, where we buy more time for the Round Table's grace by using a golden sprout. It makes sense that grace would begin to fade here, as in Nightreign the lands between and the Erdtree have essentially ceased to exist. We are operating on borrowed time, before this grace disappears completely. This issue is compounded by the fact that Grace's light seems to darken when the Nightlord reveals himself, as if the Knight itself is snuffing out the last bit of Grace's light. It is absolutely in the Erdtree's interest that it helps us defeat this cataclysm, and beyond the Round Table it provides, we can also see it helping us fight back against the Knight more actively. As the night closes in on every day, only one small circle of sanctuary remains, and above it is a golden tree. In day 1, this is a small tree, but in day 2, it is a full tree with the spirit sanctuary embedded in it. I believe the small circles we are allowed at the end of each day are creations of the Erdtree's power, which is warding the night away and allowing us to survive. This is why the night summons an end-of-day boss. It has no other way to kill us, because the Erdtree is holding back the rain. When we defeat the day 1 boss, the night is completely repulsed and it must try a second time to kill us. This time, however, the Erdtree offers us a new path forward, drawing us into the night itself and securing us passage via the Spirit Sanctuary to the Nightlord. It provides us this sanctuary, a final location of preparation and rest, and it seems that otherwise the Nightlords would be unreachable. The Erdtree literally brute forces us a path to the heart of the night. Such is the Erdtree's involvement in fighting back the night, and ultimately it is through its plan that the Nightlord is even able to be defeated. A Nightfarer claims the primordial rune of the Nightlord, and his power is seemingly sealed, and the calamity completely undone, restoring the lands between to their original state. Before I wrap up this video, I do want to talk about the ending, as it is pertinent to the Nightlord story. There are 4 main endings: the regular ending, Wilder's ending, Recluse's ending, and Iron Eye's ending. As I have said before, because of the nature of time and the collapse of reality, all of these endings could well be canon, and I believe this to be the case. Earlier we spoke of how the Nightlord's visual design suggests he has been defeated and sealed numerous times, and therefore all of these endings could have happened. Iron Eye could have killed the Round Table figure to ensure the night did not end. Recluse could have defeated the Nightlord and reclaimed her infant, and Wilder could have taken the Nightlord's place. All of these could have happened, but let us describe what we see visually in the true or normal ending. The Nightlord is defeated, and his rune is claimed by a Nightfarer. The Nightfarer travels to the future Round Table Hold, the only landmark remaining in the world, destroyed by the Nightlord. The Rune of Night is handed over to a mysterious figure, clearly someone tied to the Round Table Hold and Order. The Rune of Night is either contained or completely destroyed, and as such the Round Table begins to fade, alongside the Nightfarer, and the world is ultimately restored. We see the Erdtree and the lands between as they once were, and a bead of grace interacts with the Nightlord and sends him on his way. We know from various dialogues that once the Nightlord is defeated, this version of Round Table will fade, and everyone will be returned to where they came from.
When the Round Table's purpose is served, each sin is absolved, and everyone is sent back. The Round Table itself will become unmoored from the outside world. I suspect nothing of this place will remain.
The two exceptions to this are Wilder and Duchess. The Iron Medial believes that Wilder will not make it because he is too weak, because he sustained injuries before he arrived here, likely during the destruction of his clan at the hands of the Night. He is fading as a result, and likely will not return home with the other Nightfarers. Duchess works with the Iron Medial to create a totem that will allow the Medial to assist Wilder in returning home. She looks to save him, because she and Wilder are twins.
Are you asking that I go to the Wilder? I must refuse. If I did, you would be left truly alone, my lady priestess. It is much too cruel. Much too cruel. Apologies for my petulance just now. I should respect your wishes, of course.
It is for the same reason that Wilder aims to save Duchess from her fate. You see Duchess as the only one that is guaranteed not to make it, because she is the anchor to the Round Table. As such, she is inexorably connected to it and will fade with it when the mission is done. So I believe that the canon version of the regular ending would feature only the Duchess. It would be she who hands over the Rune of Night, and it would be she who fades away into gold, alongside the Round Table Hold. This is spelled out to us in a note found by Wilder during the course of his remembrance, and it reads the following: a scrap of paper detailing the new night, written in the tongue of an ancient people. The passage, torn from its former binding, reads, "The priestess is the very cornerstone of the Round Table, indispensable. Should the Nightlord fall, the Round Table too will crumble, as their fates are together bound. Yet should the Round Table be remade, perhaps the priestess may be emancipated from her bindings. This might be done upon the falling of the new night, should the Lord's power be lost, and if so. In order to prevent this, Wilder seeks to bring about a new night, as the note describes, in the hopes that this may create a new Round Table in response, perhaps allowing the Duchess to survive in some fashion. He does so by using a silver tear, and we know from the base game that these are once again an artificial creation of the Nox, a mimicry of life that can copy life forms. In-game we see these mimics taking all sorts of forms, from rune bears to grafted scions. Existing beings can also use a tear to be born anew, using its power of mimicry to reform themselves. For example, Bok uses it, so that he can change from a demi-human into a human. Wilder's use of it is the most ambitious that we have seen thus far, however, and he uses it so that he can be reborn as the Nightlord himself. This isn't just an aesthetic change. He clearly claims the powers and nature of the Nightlord, bringing about a new night completely. But what is even the point in this, you may ask? Why would Wilder not just keep the Nightlord alive so he can keep his sister alive? Well, one main reason is that he wants revenge against the Nightlord for what it did to his clan. So by using a silver tear, he can both spare his sister and get his revenge. Additionally, perhaps he believes that it is better he is the Nightlord, rather than Heolstor. Perhaps he believes he will remember himself and end the calamity. In his final journal entry, Wilder has unfortunately forgotten why he even did what he did, yet he grips the earring still, a totem of who he once was, as if Wilder held onto it as he transformed in order to try and hold on to himself. So, to reiterate, I believe that Duchess is the character who canonically appears in the normal ending. She hands over the Night Rune and it is destroyed, and whilst her fellow Nightfarers are returned home, she fades away into gold alongside the Round Table Hold. In a separate and simultaneous instance, Wilder becomes the Nightlord. With these two endings in mind, I would like to suggest that they are both canon, and it brings me to my Wilder and Duchess theory on the true ending of the game. After the Duchess fades away, the lands between are restored, and we see the golden strand that she became float through the void until we return to the lands between. This same strand then seems to float from the Erdtree and touch the Tree Titan. This interaction for some reason compels it to leave the lands between, and thus the threat of the Nightlord is averted for now. But why? What happened here? Why did the Nightlord finally decide to leave? Well, I believe it is because this golden strand is what remains of Duchess. She and the Round Table were connected and faded as one, and given the Round Table is a construct of grace, it makes sense that whatever is left of the Duchess has become one with the Erdtree. I also believe that by the end the Nightlord is now Wilder, and so the Duchess is able to communicate with whatever remains of her brother, and thus he remembers his purpose, and he leaves the lands between alone. Again, the world-warping nature of this calamity, and the effect it had on time, means that all of the endings can happen simultaneously. I think this neatly explains the odd behaviour of the Nightlord at the end. It looks pensive, as if it recognises the presence of his sister, despite everything that has happened. And so Wilder marches ever on, with his and Duchess's sacrifices saving the world from disaster. They also seemingly atone for the sins of their ancestors, as the sentence of the Cutting Gifted tribe is finally served. So thanks guys, those are my thoughts on the Nightlord, the Night, and the endings of the game. This story in many ways is actually a lot more complex than Elden Ring's, and I appreciate that a lot of my findings and conclusions are speculative. I am also under no illusion that my ideas may change over time, but I truly do love Nightreign, and so I am excited to continue exploring this game with you over the coming months. What did you think about the game and its lore? Did you find it as interesting as I did? Were there any major things that you believe I missed? As always, I invite your thoughts below, and until next time, I will see you in Limveld. Take care and have a wonderful night.